Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Morning Spring on Western Spring Television. It's a beautiful Wednesday morning. Here on Morning Spring, we bring you the best of news and information, starting with newspaper reviews. And of course, we dive into critical analysis, conversations with stakeholders, speaking truth to power. And that is what we do here every weekday on Morning Spring at Western Spring Television. Daniel Emeka is my name. It promises to be a great day, and you do not want to miss any part of the program this morning. So much for Nigeria. Yesterday we talked about the protest, the Nnamdi Kanu protest that started in Abuja and some southeastern states yesterday. And we are moving on as a nation. We looked at the pros and cons, the use of force by the police, firing tear gas at innocent protesters, and we try to call them out as well. Every Nigerian has their rights, has a right to express their thought. There's something called freedom of expression. And so every Nigerian has that right to express themselves in a peaceful manner, as long as they are not obstructing, free flow of traffic. As far as they are not breaking any laws, then Nigerians have the right to express, their grievances through peaceful protest. And it is the duty of the police to protect them and not just crack down. I mean, not just clamping down on them, on protesters, and preventing them from carrying out their legitimate duties. Away from that, it's a fresh day, it's a new day, it's a new dawn, and it promises to be a great show. In France, for instance, ex-president Nicolas Sarkozy has arrived in prison to start serving his jail term. He got a prison sentence of 5 years, and Nicolas Sarkozy will be the first French ex-president to go to jail. Now, that's what happens when a society is working. Where the rule of law is working, where there is justice in a society, then of course, no one should be above the law. And that's exactly what we are saying here. When exactly do you think we can see that happening in Nigeria or Africa? I've said it before, over and over again, until we start prosecuting, convicting, and sending ex-leaders to jail, for what they did for corruption, for mismanagement of public funds, until we do that to serve as a deterrent to others, we are not serious in our fight against corruption. Until we start dealing with ex-leaders, corrupt ex-leaders, then we are not really serious in fighting corruption. We're just paying lip service to it. So France has taken a bold step, sending Nicolas Sarkozy to jail just because of, conspiracy in the financing of his election campaign. And that should not be tolerated. We've seen more grievous crimes here. I mean, people steal public funds. They admit to it publicly. Sometimes they get, pardoned, and sometimes it's swept under the carpet. But that is not what we should be having as a nation if we want to move forward. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we go straight. We dive into the front pages of the newspapers this morning. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. The newspapers are in. Let's see the news making the rounds on the front pages of Nigerian newspapers this morning. We start with the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, Convention, Lamido, Turaki, McCarthy lead PDP chairman race. Lamido, Turaki, McCarthy lead PDP chairman race. So much for the embattled People's Democratic Party. You find details of that story on page 2. Below that, we have a writer, Northwest PDP set to pick consensus chair. Northwest PDP set to pick consensus chair as party zoning favors region. Party set for convention. You find details of that story on page 2. The party seems to be set for convention, but again, it is still under legal contestation as factions loyal to the FCT Minister Nyesom Wike are actually contesting that. And again, the PDP National Secretary, Senator Samuel Anyanwu, has claimed that he did not sign the letter, that he is not aware of the convention, is not in support of it, that his signature was cloned and forged. That's exactly the case. And he has called on the DSS, the police, and the office of the IG to investigate that criminal act. But guess what? The PDP is saying, well, that Samuel Ayaan actually signed those letters, that he cannot, start denying the fact that he signed the letter. So much for PDP, so much drama right there. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and see if the convention will go on as scheduled. The convention is slated for November 15 and 16, 2025. So just less than a month to the convention of the People's Democratic Party. Away from that banner headline, moving on to other stories. Still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Presidency can clash over Christian genocide claim. Presidency can clash over Christian genocide claim. Just talking about the Christian Association of details of that story on pages 4 and 5. So yesterday, quite an unfortunate incident. A tanker carrying premium motor spirit, PMS, actually had an accident and fell by the roadside, and people started scooping fuel. I mean, we've been saying this over and over again. People should value their lives, fellow Nigerians. It doesn't really make any sense. Whenever there is a tanker accident, a tanker falls off, you shouldn't go, start scooping fuel on the road. This has happened over and over again. Unnecessary deaths. This is quite avoidable. People going to scoop fuel, and now we have 35 dead and over 40 injured. Please, I think we should do better as a people. We should do better. Your life matters. Your life is important. Just imagine, how much fuel can you scoop from the road? That's a question. Just because you want to scoop some fuel, just because you want to make some extra money, and you jeopardize your life, you put your life in risk. Quite an unfortunate one right there. Happened in Niger State. You understand, 35 people are dead already. This is quite unfortunate. You can read up details of that story on pages 4 and 5 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Away from that unfortunate story, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Presidential pardon. AGF orders multi-agency probe. Presidential pardon. AGF orders multi-agency probe. You find details of that story on page 2. The Attorney General of the Federation ordering a multi-agency probe. Some legal practitioners have called this medicine after death, because that list was scrutinized. About 175 names passed through all the necessary processes. The Council of State saw it, approved of it. Before it got to the presidency, the AGF himself too saw that list. Then Mr. President came out to give a public pronouncement that those persons have been pardoned. So just for them to, execute that presidential pardon, then we started hearing the DSS, the police, and the ICPC started claiming that some names were smuggled in. Why are we having this at this time as a nation? This, I say, is quite embarrassing. And that is what it is. Now they have to probe that list to see actually where those names came from. If truly names were smuggled in, how come we are having that kind of drama at this time as a nation? You might want to read up details of that story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Away from that, Diri delays APC move amid Silva Lokpobiri power talks. Diri delays APC move amid Silva Lokpobiri power talks. You find details of that story on page 2. Still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, Sanwo-Olu, Fashola, Ambode, Lagos APC endorse Tinubu's re-election. Sanwo-Olu, Fashola, Ambode, Lagos APC endorse Tinubu's re-election. Talking about former governors of Lagos State right there, endorsing the re-election of Mr. President. What do you expect? You find details of that story on page 9. Of course, they are APC members, so it's natural for them to support their candidate. Moving to the bottom strip, MDA is under fire as FG probes TSA violations. Ministries, departments, and agencies under fire as federal government probes TSA violations. You find details of that story on page 19. Hit-and-run driver kills Lagos director days before retirement. Hit-and-run driver kills Lagos director days before retirement. Quite an unfortunate story. You find details of that on page 5. And finally, from the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, Amokwiton resumes next week ahead of Anambra poll. Amokwiton resumes, next week ahead of Anambra poll. You find details of that story on page 9, talking about the new INEC chairman, Joash Amokwiton. Of course, he has been approved by the Senate after being nominated by Mr. President, and now he'll be resuming fully as INEC chairman next week in preparation for the elections, the gubernatorial elections in Anambra State coming up next month, November. That will be all from the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. On the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, women, children killed in another Niger tanker explosion. Women, children killed in another Niger tanker explosion. Quite an unfortunate one right there. The tanker explosion that killed about 35 people and left over 40 others injured. Again, I say this is quite unnecessary. Your lives matter. You shouldn't risk your life just because you want to, scoop fuel from a fallen tanker. I think that's one lesson we should learn as a people. Away from that, moving to the top strip, Doro replaces Nentawe as minister. Doro replaces Nentawe as minister. ADC secretariat attacked in Ekiti. Party 6 probe. ADC secretariat attacked in Ekiti. Party 6 probe. Bauchi creates 13 new emirates. Bauchi creates 13 new emirates. And I'm moving to the bottom strip. Christian genocide claim in Nigeria falls. Coming from Sultan. Christian genocide claim in Nigeria falls. That is coming from Sultan. You might want to read up details of that story on page 5 of the Daily Trust newspaper. And on the bottom strip, 17-year-old boy allegedly plucks sister's eyes for rituals. Now, this is bizarre. 17-year-old boy allegedly plucks sister's eyes for rituals. You find that story on page 7. How bizarre can one get? A 17-year-old boy, plucking out the eyes of his sister for rituals. 17-year-old. This is quite unfortunate. You can read up details of that story on page 17. Knowledge most powerful tool for a just society, coming from Saraki. Knowledge most powerful tool for a just society, Saraki. You find that story on page 10. Protests. Court remands Nnamdi Kanu's lawyer, brother in prison. Protest. Court remands Nnamdi Kanu's lawyer, brother in prison. You find details of that story on page 6. Quite interesting. The Free Nnamdi Kanu protest took another turn when police decided to clamp down on the protesters, and now we understand his brother and his lawyer have been remanded. I believe they'll be charged to court, and of course, they'll have their time. They'll have the opportunity to defend themselves. That'll be all from the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the Vanguard newspaper. On the front page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning, Abuja protests. Court remands Kanu's lawyer, brother, 10 others in prison. Abuja protest. Court remands Kanu's lawyer, brother, 10 others in prison. You find details of that story on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning. 73% rural residents say inflation rate is high. That's coming from CBN. 73% rural residents say inflation rate is high, coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria. You find details of that story on page 20. Why governors, others are defecting to APC? Governor Sule. While governors, others are defecting to APC, coming from Governor Sule. ISWAP plans fresh attacks in Ondo, Kogi, coming from DSS, that's the Department of State Services. ISWAP plans fresh attacks in Ondo, Kogi, DSS. Ondo Police CP holds security meeting. Thankfully, they have the intel now, so the DSS and the police should be taking necessary steps to make sure they foil these planned attacks in Kogi and Ondo State. We just see it on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning. Court nullifies Ebonyi 2024 LG elections, sacks chairman, councillors. Court nullifies Ebonyi 2024 local government elections, sacks chairman, councillors. You find details of that story on page 37. Tanker explosion, over 30 killed in Niger, scooping fuel from falling tanker. Over 30 killed in Niger, scooping fuel from fallen tanker. You find details of that story on page 7, talking about the tanker explosion that took place in Niger State. Quite an unfortunate incident. Why Nigeria should not be designated country of concern, coming from Kuka. Why Nigeria should not be designated country of concern, Kuka. You find details of that story on page 14. With a rider, Khan fires back at presidency, says Christian genocide real. Christian Association of Nigeria fires back at presidency, says Christian genocide real. You find details of that story on page 8. 2026 WCQ, NFF rolls out plans for Super Eagles playoffs. NFF rolls out plans for Super Eagles playoffs. You'll find details of that on page 39. And that'll be all from the front page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the Guardian newspaper. Let's take a quick look at the front page of the Guardian newspaper this morning. 5G promise fades as pricey phones services shut out poor Nigerians. 5G promise fades as pricey phones services shuts out poor Nigerians. You find details of that story on page 6. Of course, pricey phones and poor services, shutting out poor Nigerians. Right there, I'm talking about 5G promise for Nigerians. Below that, you can see the details. Right there, you can see the statistics. Smartphones, you can see from 2021 to 2025, 19.7% to 66%. Talking about the pricing of phones right there. Below that, you can see from 2G to 3G to 4G and then 5G. The percentage for 2G, we have 38.4%. For 3G, 7.13%. For 4G, we have 51.2%. Apparently, a majority of Nigerians are on 4G right now. Then for 5G, we have 3.27%. And that's talking about access to cellular networks in Nigeria. Access to cellular networks. So we have 51.2% of Nigerian cell phone users using 4G network, and just a meager 3.27% having access to 5G in Nigeria. Then again, looking at the figures, the population, we have 5.6 million connections in 2025. And then 4G for 2021, we have 40.88%. Then moving up to 51.22% in 2025. That's talking about the analysis revenue, which is a critical failure to most 5G demand in Nigeria's two largest markets. Average 5G gap. Then, of course, the 5G capable services. Then, of course, we talk about Lagos and Abuja. Those are the two largest markets. For Lagos, we have 70.9%. Then for Abuja, we have 65.5%. 65.6%, I beg your pardon. Talking about access to 5G and, of course, other grades of network right there in the Nigerian telecommunication space. Away from that, still on the front page of the Guardian newspaper this morning. Senate slams life sentence on child defilement to toughen laws on rape. Senate slams life sentence on child defilement to toughen laws on rape. You find details of that story on page 3. I think this is quite a good one. No one in their right senses should defile a child. It stands condemned. And now they're going to be having a life sentence. And that's coming from the Nigerian Senate, just to serve as a deterrent to others. Below that, we have another story. Don't designate Nigeria country of concern. Kuka appeals. Don't designate Nigeria country of concern. Kuka appeals. You find details of that story on page 3. Still talking about Nigeria being designated, redesignated, of course. Nigeria was once designated as a country of concern. That was during the first tenure of President Donald Trump. And now he's considering, designating Nigeria once again as a country of concern. Away from that story, as APC rallies behind Tinubu, ex-minister warns corruption, poverty, pushing nation to edge. As APC rallies behind Tinubu, ex-minister warns corruption, poverty, pushing nation to edge. You find details of that story on page 6. And that is just to state the obvious, talking about the challenges we are facing as a people in Nigeria. Away from that story, oil sector falters as FIRS pushes government's revenue by 31.38 trillion naira. Oil sector falters as FIRS, that's the Federal Inland Revenue Service, pushes government's revenue by 31.38 trillion naira. We find details of that story on business page 15. OAU students, 5 in fear of, I'll say that again. OAU students live in fear as robbers repeatedly raid Morimi Estate Hostel. OAU students live in fear as robbers repeatedly raid Morimi Estate Hostel. You find details of that story on page 8. And if robbers are repeatedly raiding a particular area, then the question is, what are the security agencies doing? If it becomes a repeated if it's a repeated occurrence, if it's happening over and over again, then of course, the security agencies should take decisive steps and protect those students right there. That'll be all from the front page of the Guardian newspaper this morning. And that also brings us to a conclusion of the newspaper review segment. We'll take a quick break. When we return, we dive into other matters. Join us again.